Tal Ben-Shahar, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mate, it's my absolute pleasure. You are a professor on happiness. You're studied in psychology, organisational behaviour, philosophy. So you have a wealth of knowledge that I am certainly going to tap into today, for both my sake and for the listeners' sake. But the first thing I really wanted to ask you, Tal, is, happiness on the surface is, such a simple concept. It's something we've all touched or felt, hopefully experienced at some point in our life. Yet, for so many of us, at times in our life, it feels so elusive. What do you think we misunderstand about happiness that makes it feel as so?
Yeah. There are quite a few barriers to happiness, and these barriers exist for the layperson, for the non-expert, as well as for many experts, scholars in the field of happiness. The first such barrier is the expectation of a constant high, of an unbroken chain of positive experiences. What many people fail to accept, even embrace, is the fact that painful emotions are a natural part of any life, even a happy life. And when we reject this fact, there's a paradox at play. And the paradox is that unhappiness actually goes up. In other words, when we reject, when we defy, when we don't accept happiness, when we don't accept unhappiness, we actually become more unhappy. The first step to happiness is allowing in unhappiness.
It's so contrary to popular belief, isn't it? And people probably hate to hear that, but we all need to, because you're right that I think we have this certain self-criticism that we experience as human beings where, our imperfect nature, which goes out into the world and gets frustrated and angry and has personal challenge, but is so aware because of the self-help books we've read and the podcasts we've listened to, that all of these positive, or what we deem on the surface as positive emotions, are available to us, that when we experience what we seem to deem as the more challenging, or in most people's interpretation, the negative emotions, we get frustrated with ourselves for having experienced them. I'm the biggest culprit of this. I get frustrated quite easily. I'm very impatient. And so I get shitty at myself for being frustrated and ultimately become more frustrated.
Yeah, this is a conversation that has been going on for literally thousands of years initially, or at least as far as we know, initially in Buddhism, where they talk about two levels of pain or two levels of suffering. The language differs. The first level is inevitable. It's your reaction to a sad situation. It's your pain when you observe or experience something difficult. That's inevitable, that's automatic. The question is what happens after. Now, if we accept and embrace that suffering, that pain, that dis-ease, then it just stays as it is. But if we reject it, if we deny it, if we try to push it away, that's when we get to the second level of suffering. In other words, there is frustration over the frustration. There is pain that grows as a result of the fact that we don't accept the pain. And the key is to what I've come to call giving ourselves the permission to be human. And that means accepting, embracing every conceivable emotion, the pleasurable and the painful.
Well, that probably answers a question that was at the forefront of my mind for you today, is that, there is a line that needs to be walked between being, consciously aware of everything that we're experiencing and feeling as human beings, and what some people would describe as the opposite, which is being blissfully ignorant. And I don't think that, both have their bonuses, both have their challenges. And I guess it's the permission to be human that allows you to walk the line in between.
Yes, it is. And it's also about quantity. There is a phrase that is attributed to Socrates written by Plato, his student, that the unexamined life is not worth living. The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, I think there is a second part to it, which is often ignored, especially by academics, and that is that the over-examined life is tedious. So, we need to find the right balance between, self-awareness and analysis on the one hand, and, just being on the other. I think going to the extreme in either direction is not fulfilling our potential, full human potential. So we need to find the right balance. Where that balance is, for some people it's 50-50, for someone else it's 20-80. We need to experiment and find our sweet spot, so to speak.
It's funny you say this. So, a couple of months ago, I was sitting down with two of my best mates, and I can be a very deep overthinker, not so much in spiraling into the negative, but really pulling apart everything and every experience in life and really examining it. And I was talking about how I probably need to find the balance between both of these things you just described. And, I went on a bit of a 15-minute tirade of talking about what I think that balance is. And one of my great mates said to me, "It's 2 words for that, brother: yin, yang." And I was like, well said, well said. It's something that I think we brush over, that most areas of our life we're always negotiating the balance.
Yeah.
Or what that balance looks like to us.
Right. And, it's not easy finding that balance because there are no clear-cut prescriptions, certainly no universal prescriptions. So, we get the principle, the yin and the yang, the balance, moderation, the golden mean, we can describe it, but where is it exactly? And this is where we get to something which is a very important element in the pursuit of happiness. So, my work revolves around research. And there's a lot of research today coming out in the field of happiness studies, positive psychology. But what's important is not just research. What's equally important is me-search. And that's not looking outside for the answers, but rather inside. And the importance of me-search lies in that we change, we evolve. I'm not the same today as I was in my 20s. And, sometimes I'm not the same in the morning as I'm in the evening. And that's where we need to engage in me-search. Again, not overdo it, the over-examined life. However, me-search is essential.
What I love about you, Tal, is you have this intersecting number of interests that make your research and your work so interesting to me. I think the modern take of understanding the latest psychology mixed in with, you've already mentioned today a few Stoic philosophers and, a more, to some ancient way of thinking, but to me something that really interests me, but also your work in human behaviour. Where do all of those intersect in the conditions of modern society and life? And do you see that they work together or rather at times pull against each other?
Yes, so the short answer is together big time. And, I want to take you back to what for me was an epiphany. It was 2015, and I was on a transatlantic flight. And those long flights, I think, better than most people around the world. When you're exhausted, but still too uncomfortable to fall asleep. So I was in one of those states when a question came to mind. And the question was, how is it that there is a field of study for psychology, which is what I was studying, philosophy, history, biology, medicine, education, law, geography, you name it. But there is no field of study for happiness. Yeah, there is positive psychology, but that's just the psychology of happiness. What about what philosophers like Marcus Aurelius or Lao Tzu had to say about happiness? What about what the great writers in literature had to say about happiness, like Marianne Evans or Chinua Achebe? What about what movies can teach us about happiness, or theology? Again, whether you're religious or not, there is a great deal of wisdom in the religious traditions from around the world? What about what neuroscience and economics can teach us about happiness? Why isn't there a field, or rather an interdisciplinary field, that brings together the ideas from past and present from the different disciplines? And I resolved on that flight to help create a field of happiness studies, an interdisciplinary field of happiness studies. You know, my fatigue in a second went away, and I literally couldn't put my pen down. And that's what I've been doing since. You know, with a number of colleagues, we have been developing a field of study around happiness.
Has there been much resistance in coming to conclusions on those ideas and seeing where all of these beliefs and ideas and research from different fields come together? Or has that, once diving into it, been quite a natural happening of seeing the answers and seeing the path that lay ahead?
Yeah, so interestingly, there's been both real and, I must say, surprising levels of openness towards this, because we all want to be happier, and so both lay people, academics, business people, therapists have really embraced this field of happiness studies. And there's also been some resistance on two levels primarily. First, academia over the past probably 150 years has really worked towards specialization. So, I think of, my original field, psychology. It's not just that psychologists are setting themselves apart, say, from philosophers and economists, where in the past they were, working together, playing in the same sandbox. It's within psychology that there is differentiation. So are you a cognitive psychologist or a developmental? Are you maybe doing positive or psychopathology? So there has really been a very strong movement, a strong current pulling us towards specialization. And the field of happiness studies just does the exact opposite. Not only does it bring together fields from within psychology, it brings different fields together and says, let's talk. Let's discuss the important questions of human existence. So there's been some resistance to that. The second place where there has been resistance is the mere talk around happiness as an academic field. And the reason why there has been resistance to it is somewhat justified. You see, over the past 50 years, at least, probably longer, the self-help or New Age movement has really taken over the field of happiness, the questions of well-being. And what do you have? You have literally thousands, not exaggerating, thousands of books coming out each year around the question of happiness or related questions, and most of them are not evidence-based, do not draw on rigorous research or scholarship. So it is understandable why many scholars are skeptical about any conversation that has to do with happiness. They don't see it as serious. So part of my work is around convincing those skeptics, around bringing rigor, academic rigor, scholarship, research, evidence into this field of happiness.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it is certainly an art and a science that applies to both of these things. The science that probably tickles the fancy of the academics, and the art that maybe tickles the fancy of those who come from fields outside of academia, who want to become interested and feel and learn to be happier. Because I'm assuming it is a skill, right?
Very much so. And we started, you asked around barriers. One of the barriers around attaining happiness actually has to do with the fact that many people do not perceive it as a skill. So, they would come to me and say, Tal, we bought your book. And I say, great. Next level, Tal, we have your book next to us. When we go to bed, I said, amazing. Next level, we are reading your book. Wonderful. But that is not enough. Not buying a book, not having it next to your bed, and not reading it. You need to apply it. And this is a given when it comes to any other skill. I mean, you wouldn't hear people say, I just got this amazing book on playing tennis. And okay, and what did you do with it? You want to become a better tennis player? You have to practice, get on court, sweat, effort. Same with, playing the violin. It's not enough to read a book. You need to put in the time. And it's exactly the same with happiness. And unfortunately, there is a double standard here where people think it's enough to read the book or listen to the podcast or go to the lecture or attend the workshop, and then you actually become happier. No, it's a first step, an important first step, but that's all it is. What needs to follow is taking action, the practices. And again, these practices could be, starting to meditate, or keeping a gratitude journal, or spending more quality time with loved ones, or becoming more of a student, a learner. These are all ways, and there are of course many more, to increase levels of happiness, but only when practice comes alongside understanding, knowing and doing.
My suspicion is that for so many of us, and I think we can, definitely, I know I can, I'm sure you probably can too, can speak to the reason that maybe sometimes we've not applied what we know or have learnt or have been told, is this fear of failure. Now, I'm essentially alley-ooping you here to, I know, what is one of your favourite quotes from Thomas Edison, I believe. But talk to me about why we should understand that failure is a part of life and knowingly move forward and try things and expect that at times we will fail, but at times we will succeed and learn and move forward in a direction where we can be happier, where we can apply this stuff to our life.
We look at work by some of the most important psychologists of our time. One of them is Adam Grant from Wharton, or Dean Simonton from UC Davis. And what we see is that the most successful people, the most creative people, those who really made a difference and are making a difference in the world, are also the ones who fail the most times. And that makes sense. Again, using an American analogy, you swing a lot. Well, I guess it works in cricket as well.
It does,
You
yeah.
swing a lot, and you're more likely to hit the ball. If you don't swing and just wait for that perfect ball, then A, you're not going to improve, and B, you're unlikely to hit the ball. So practice makes excellent. It's constant failure. Fail fast and learn from those failures. This is what will lead to more success and to more happiness. Because if you get up every morning, and if my primary concern is I don't want to fail, I want to avoid failure, that's a heavy burden to carry. Whereas if I wake up and say, failure is part of being alive, it's part of success, it's part of a full and fulfilling life, a happy life, then I feel that there is much less weight to carry. I don't have to prove myself every step of the way. I can do more and experience more of a sense of being, just going through life, as opposed to struggling through it. Failure is an inevitable part. One of the quotes that I repeat over and over again, whether it's to my kids or to my clients or students, is learn to fail or fail to learn. No shortcuts, unfortunately.
I love it. I want to pull on two threads there. So you mentioned the name Adam Grant, who I know was a student of yours at a time, and I can see why, actually hearing that made so much sense to me because I've loved a lot of his work as well as I have yours. But you were, you know, leading a class at Harvard that I believe, from my research, was the most popular class at Harvard at that point in time. And I think from a few whispers I've heard, maybe one of the most popular ever. What was that class actually structured around? Was it the study of happiness, or was it the combination of your academic backgrounds?
Yeah, so, you know, the class was really the class I wish I had taken when I was an undergraduate at Harvard. Because in many ways my journey started there. I went into Harvard as a computer science major, was really unhappy. Not because I didn't like computer science. I did and do love computers and technology, but for other reasons, and I wanted to figure it out. So I switched from computer science to philosophy and psychology in order to ask a simple question, or two simple questions. Why aren't I happy? How can I become happier? So I studied the field, and over the years had learned a great deal from the field of psychology, in particular positive psychology, which emerged as a field later on when I was a graduate student. And so I wanted to put together a class that I thought would have helped me, and consequently would have also helped many other students navigate the challenges of life, become more resilient. And what I did was incorporate storytelling, making it accessible. I'm a big fan of biographies, so looking at I brought in biographies of Thomas Edison and Helen Keller and Steve Jobs later on, and all the people who have struggles and had struggled with life's most important questions. So I incorporate storytelling and, of course, research. At that time, I was just teaching positive psychology, so there was no happiness studies. It wasn't an integration of different disciplines. And what was very important for me was to make it practical. So every class, they had to take the ideas home and apply them in their rooming group, apply it in their families, think about how they will apply it when they have a full-time job, or use it to improve their relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, and such. So it was very much focused on practice without losing the academic rigor. And when I started teaching the class, initially it was a small class, and the reason why it grew and became popular was because at the end of the year, students evaluate classes, and they rate the professor, and they rate the readings, and they rate the overall quality of the class. And my class got good evaluations, but many classes get good evaluations. But then there is an open question at the end of the questionnaire. And that open question simply says, anything you'd like to add? And a large number of students wrote, this course changed my life. And again, this was not an orchestrated response. So independently, they said it. So first of all, when I read that, and they wrote about it in the Harvard Crimson, the newspaper, when I read that, I said, this is exactly what I wanted to hear. Because this is the class I would have wanted to take when I was an undergrad. And when other students at Harvard read it, that's when it became the most popular course. Again, not foregoing academic rigor. I'm not for self-help and new age approach. This is about research, rigor, evidence-based, things that actually work.
I love that so much. And a little fun fact for you here before I pull on the practical side of things and we dive into that. I don't know if you know this, but well, firstly, I never thought I'd be sitting in front of a Harvard professor learning anything. So this is, a real tick box for me today. Very exciting. But I will say, I know that squash was your first love. Former guest of this podcast, Will Ahmed, who is the founder and CEO of Whoop, also very fond of squash and played squash at Harvard, I believe. Did you know that about Will?
I did not.
There you go. It's
Wow.
a fun little intersection. When I heard you on Dax Shepard's podcast and I heard you talk about
Yeah.
that love for squash and your time at Harvard, I wondered whether you'd actually got a scholarship to Harvard to play squash.
Yeah, so Harvard or Ivy Leagues in general do not give sports scholarships. However, they do recruit athletes. So, if you're, football, soccer, squash, volleyball player, they can recruit you, and that, of course, helps you get in. But all scholarships in Ivy Leagues are actually need-based. So you could be, the next Einstein. If your parents can afford to pay the full price, they'll pay it.
There you go. There you go. So it's very interesting. So this is a perfect segue. So I know that exercise is a huge part of the practical application, but before I jump ahead, the way that I actually come across your work in the first place was I had heard from one of the guests on the podcast about Nassim Taleb's idea of anti-fragility and that
Yes.
concept. And so I'd actually found myself on the lounge one morning, going through YouTube, looking for a little bit more on this topic of anti-fragility. And I come across your Big Think video on YouTube and just loved it. I think it was 13 or 15 minutes I sat there, and for me, a lot of that lecture style content, if it's not, firstly, of real substance, but secondly, of fantastic delivery, it can just all be a little bit lost in the boredom, right? But your presentation is sensational and the content is so great. And I loved every bit of that video. And your breakdown of your acronym, SPIRE, be it spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional well-being, and how they are essentially the 5 elements of happiness. So this is, I guess, the practical application. Doing things within these pillars and within these elements that allow happiness to be, correct me if I'm wrong, the product of living your life in this direction.
Yeah, and that's very important to understand why. Because again, a major barrier to happiness is the direct pursuit of happiness. What do I mean by that? So if you wake up in the morning and you say to yourself, "Today's the day. I'm going to become happier. I'm making a choice to be happy. Happiness is valuable for me. It's important. I'm going to attain it." You will actually become less happy. Now, that's a problem because there are so many benefits to happiness. Beyond the fact that it feels good to feel good, happiness also contributes to our creativity and productivity. It improves our relationships. It enhances our health, makes us more resilient, and the list goes on. We become more successful, all other things being equal, if we increase our happiness levels. So there are so many benefits to happiness, and yet what the research, and this is research by Iris Moss, shows is that if you tell yourself, "I'm going to be happy," or "happiness is important for me," you're less likely to be happy. So what do we do about that? So here's an analogy that can help, that has helped me understand how we can value happiness and enhance it. Imagine going outside. It's a beautiful sunny day. You look up at the sun. Now, if you look at the sun directly, it will hurt your eyes. You will tear up. However, if you take that same sunlight and you put it through a prism, so you break the light, then you can look at the outcome, at the colors of the rainbow, and enjoy them and savor them. So looking at the sun directly, that hurts. Looking at the sun indirectly, that helps. And it's the same with happiness. When I pursue it directly, I want to be happy, I'm going to be happy, I'm making a choice to become happier. That's directly pursuing it. It will hurt us. We'll become less happy. But if we take happiness and break it down into its metaphorical colors of the rainbow and pursue those, then we can become happier. That's the indirect pursuit of happiness. Now, the question is, what are those metaphorical colors of the rainbow? And that's where we get to the spire elements. Spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional. These are the metaphorical colors of the rainbow. These are the very things that we can and ought to pursue if we are to become happier. They are our indirect path to happiness.
Oh, mate, I love this so much. And I think that this is for me, this is the thing that when I watched your episode on Big Things YouTube channel, it clicked to me so clearly where so many of us go wrong. And the way that at least I perceive it is when we attach happiness to certain things in life that we think we can just grab a hold of, it often eludes us. Like, I think that everybody can say that they've had an experience at some point in their life where they've said, when I reach this milestone, be it in my career or financially, or when I have this many friends, or when I reach this age, I will in turn feel happy. And then we get to that moment and we look around and happiness has escaped us. It is something different that we feel. It is probably the weight of expectation, having removed or stripped any opportunity for happiness from us. So what is it about the pursuit of these things, be it spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, or emotional well-being, that actually allows us to achieve the happiness? Is it being in pursuit of something that is net positive to our lives? Is it the pursuit in itself, like being in the motion of something that allows us as human beings to feel some kind of internal rightness? Like, I'm trying to think of the best way to conceptualize this for people listening to understand it.
Yeah, so the way to think about these five elements of a happy life, the spire elements, is that they are part of our nature as human beings. And, just like, vitamin C is good for us. Cyanide is bad for us. In the same way, psychologically, there are certain things that are good for us and certain things that are bad for us. Now, why? For each one of the spire elements, you can find evolutionary reasons, or, for people in religion, they can find religious reasons. But the fact is, regardless of where they came from, how or why they emerged, they are human needs. And Bradley, what I think may be helpful is, let me elaborate on each one of them
That'd be
just
great.
briefly, and then you'll see how deep rooted they are in our nature. So begin with spiritual well-being. Spiritual well-being, we can of course attain it through religion. However, even more fundamentally, it's about finding a sense of meaning and purpose in our life. And we can find that through religion. We can find it in our work. We can find it also in our relationships or in our hobbies. But it's a fundamental human need. Viktor Frankl talked about man's search for meaning and how that's important regardless of where we are, whether we are doing work that we love or trying to survive in a concentration camp. The second element beyond meaning and purpose of spiritual well-being is being mindful, being present. And again, there's a long history of work around meditation, but meditation broadly defined. So yes, we can sit down, in lotus position and focus on the breath going in and out, or we can engage in prayer, or we can listen to a piece of music and be present. Or we can play sports and experience flow, or engage in yoga. These are all practices that get us to be present. And that is a deep, essential human need that, by the way, is frustrated in today's world by and large. Daniel Goleman of emotional intelligence fame talks about our age being the age of distraction. And it's so important to shift from multitasking to single tasking, at least part of the time. So that's spiritual well-being. Mindfulness and meaning, presence and purpose. The P of Spire, physical well-being. That's about nutrition. It's about exercise. Regular physical exercise has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, working in the same way. It releases norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, all the feel-good chemicals in the brain, and or at least no negative side effects. So exercise is important. Rest and recovery is important in the physical well-being elements. So we have nutrition, we have recovery, we have exercise. Also touch matters a great deal, whether it's hug or massage or any other form of tactile connection. Again, playing together in the same sandbox as opposed to being apart. The third element of Spire, the I, that's intellectual well-being. That's about curiosity, about being lifelong learners, about asking questions. Bradley, one of my favorite studies came out recently, shows that curiosity is not just important for success, which it is. It doesn't just contribute to happiness, which it does. It also helps us live longer. So curiosity may kill the cat. It does the exact opposite for us humans. Intellectual well-being is also about deep learning. It's about deep engagement, whether it's with text, it could be with a poem. Today in schools, learning is mostly linear. Okay, so you've learned 19th century Australian history, check. You've learned 20th century European, check, we can move on. Instead of deep engagement, reading and rereading. First course I took at Harvard as an undergrad, my freshman year, was a course on speed reading. And I must say, it stood me in good stead, and I'm grateful for that. But I think an even more important course that universities need to offer is slow reading or deep reading. And yet today we mostly skim the surface. We browse as opposed to going deep. So these are all elements of intellectual well-being. Relational well-being, the R of Spire, number one predictor of happiness. Quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. It could be our best friend, it could be family, it could be in the context of a romantic relationship, it could also be at work. Quality time with people who care about us and whom we care about, who are supportive and whom we support. Kindness, generosity, also part of relational well-being, are critical for a happy life. And then finally, emotional well-being. And that's about learning to embrace what we spoke about at the beginning, learning to embrace painful emotions, no matter what they are, and cultivating pleasurable emotions, like gratitude, like joy, like love. So these are the 5 elements of a happy life. Now, if I wake up in the morning and say, I want to be happy, that's a problem. But if I say, I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes today, or exercise 4 times a week, or learn, listen to a podcast every other day, or which is intellectual well-being, or spend more quality time with my loved ones, relational well-being, or do the gratitude exercise before going to bed. These are all indirect ways of pursuing happiness. evidence-based, that will increase our levels of well-being.
It is so interesting that you're saying this right now, because what I think has stood out to me and I've loved so much about this SPIRE model, which I haven't shared with you yet, and I wish I had my journal handy, because there was a process that I went through a couple of years ago where I sat down and really thought about, for me to live my most fulfilling and true life, what are the 5 most important values or principles that I want to live by. And I kid you not, if you look at that piece of paper, I wish I had it handy to show you, Tal. It would say relationships, health, it would say what you would call resilience 2.0, anti-fragility. It would have purpose, and it would have constant learning and development. They are the 5 things for me. There are extra things that I add to the fold at times, but they are the 5 that have stood the test of the time of a few years now, that when I apply them to my life and I live in alignment and accordance with them, I feel as though my life is in its best state. It is the most resilient from a perspective of being able to move through the world, feel happiness, feel joy, feel all of the challenges, but yet continue moving forward with such a deep purpose. I love that you mentioned Viktor Frankl, and a quote that sits quite readily at the front of my mind at all times is, a man who has a great enough why can bear almost anyhow.
Right.
And I think that is so important for people to hear throughout the challenges of their life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Bradley. And you talk about how when you introspected, when you conducted your me search, you came up with a very similar model to SPIRE. And this is something that I often emphasize to my students. I say to them, I didn't invent SPIRE. At best, at most, I invented a new acronym. And even that wasn't by myself. Megan McDonough and Maria Sirois, my colleagues, and I came up with it together. Because all we did was we looked far and wide, as well as deep inside. Far and wide, we looked at the research out there. We looked at the great works, whether it's the works of Lao Tzu, whether it's the works of Aristotle, whether it's more modern days, Helen Keller or Tara Wright Trent. We looked at the work of the great thinkers throughout history, and we extracted the elements that are related to happiness, to the good life, and then we synthesized them. They're not new. They are simply a synthesis of the wisdom of the ages, including modern research, of course.
Which I think is so refreshing for people to hear, because all of these concepts and all of these ideas are within arm's reach. It's something that literally you could walk away from listening to this podcast or watching it and start to apply all of these things to your life. And that is the practical application. Like, whether people do it or not, there is a long period of my life in which I didn't. And I felt the pain of that. I found myself searching for something that I was never going to find, but something I had to go out and move towards. And that has been one of the greatest lessons of the last 5-10 years of my life, is that everything is a product of working towards the things that are your values or your pillars, not something that will be handed to you like a merit award.
Yeah, and again, that's the key. The key is to put in the work. So a couple of things. One, an Australian psychologist, Russ Harris, talks about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I often think that if I was going back, 30 years now to when I started studying or, started my graduate work, I would probably study ACT. That would probably be my focus. I think it's such a powerful method, approach. Why? Because the focus there is on acting, on doing, on behavior. In fact, the the founders of the system insist not to call it ACT, like you would call CBT or DBT. Call it ACT, because they want people to think about taking action. It doesn't matter how you feel. Accept it, embrace it, be mindful of whatever it is that you're experiencing, and then choose the life that is most valued by you. And that is the key. As you said, move towards your values, your beliefs, your passions, your bliss. So that's one thing. The second thing, Bradley, as you were talking, I was thinking about why do so few people actually do what they know? Or why does the knowing-doing gap exist? And here's a simple example. Question for you. Do you prefer to appreciate your loved ones or the good things in your life, or would you rather take them all for granted?
Of
Now,
course, appreciate.
Again, it's a rhetorical question. I don't think anyone would say, I've had enough of appreciating my loved ones, time to take them for granted now. And yet, most people, most of the time, take the good things, including their loved ones, for granted. Why? We do it not because we're bad people, not because we don't really love our loved ones. And it's not because we're not smart. We do it because we forget. And what we need as an antidote to this forgetfulness very often are simple reminders. And these reminders can come in different shapes and forms. We can use technology as a reminder. We can wear a bracelet as a reminder. I got the idea of a bracelet from Sarah Norham. She wrote a wonderful book called Appreciative Coaching. And in Appreciative Coaching, she writes about one of her clients, Rory, who transitioned into a management position. And he said, ever since I became a manager, I feel like I'm constantly distracted. I'm not in the present moment, in the here and now. So she encouraged the following intervention. Rory was wearing a hand watch. So she said to him, on your watch, write the letter N. N standing for now. So every time he looked, what time is it? It was a reminder for him to return to the present moment. Now, I don't wear a watch, but I can easily wear a bracelet. So whenever I want to incorporate a habit, a practice in my life, whenever I want to bridge the knowing-doing gap, I wear this a bracelet for 30 days. I also have, on my wall here, I have certain reminders. Every morning when I wake up, I read what I call my ideal self, the way I want to be in the world, as a reminder. Even though, I've written books about the permission to be human. And yet every morning I remind myself, give yourself the permission to be human. Accept and embrace rather than deny and reject painful emotions.
One of the great blessings of my life, Tal, is that I have had quite a consistent health challenge with cystic fibrosis. And the reason I would account for it as a blessing is because it has provided me what you just described as all of these consistent reminders through the people I've been touched by, the conversations I've been afforded to have, and the experiences that I've had to go through with my health that have reminded me of how beautiful life is and how appreciative I am for all of the things that exist within my life. And I'm currently in the process of writing my book. I'd like to think I'm 50% of the way through it, but I really look forward to the publisher's comments on the first half, because they might say you're only 20. But I am constantly reminded as I sit down to share these stories that have formed part of my life experience, be it people I've met in hospital, conversations I've had with doctors, challenges along the way of all of these things that we're discussing here today. And you're right, that even just as I sit down to write them and reflect on them, they serve as these little reminders of things that I know so well, but often forget. And it's just part of the human condition. Our minds are so busy, we have so many things going on, and it's been part of my mission when I mentioned earlier in the podcast about negotiating the balance, is to remind myself that there are seasons of life, but always negotiate the balance of how I find, myself in that right place as consistently as I possibly can. Now, I know that in the current conditions of social media, podcasts and self-help land today, there is, I think, a lot of merit behind ideas like delayed gratification, but there's also challenges around these kind of concepts and topics where, we can use like a David Goggins-like figure who I just have so much admiration for his ability to keep enduring difficulty after difficulty. But in his life, I don't see happiness for myself, because this consistent delay of gratification, I think, can actually be dangerous for people too. On the opposite end of the spectrum is pure hedonistic pleasure, always and every day in every opportunity, but somewhere in the middle is the balance. And I think that is one of the more challenging lines to walk in life, is where do I delay gratification? Where do I enjoy the pleasure of the simple moment that I exist in? Have you, in all of your wisdom and learning, figured out how to decipher that code in your own life, where you know how to work for things, but know how to enjoy them where the opportunity exists too?
What you're describing, and I want to take it, take a bird's eye view of the idea you bring up, is what Jim Collins and Jerry Porras from Stanford call the genius of the and. The genius of the and. They talk about it in the context of companies, that the great companies are able to synthesize seemingly opposite ideas, and instead of seeing them as either or, integrating them into an and, the genius of the and. And the genius of the and, as you describe it, is about learning to appreciate what we have not taken for granted, what we have, and yet aspiring for more, and yet wanting to grow. So it's sort of, being satisfied and dissatisfied at the same time. Easier said than done, because we tend to gravitate towards extremes because it's, easier to understand, it's cleaner. There's less room for maneuvering, because what's the right balance for you, Bradley? Is it 37% and 63, or is it 50-50? Rarely. So and it's also different for you today than it was yesterday or will be tomorrow. So in a sense, it's constantly being vigilant, on the lookout, or rather the look in, to understand where you are and what works for you. Now, the nice thing about exploring these ideas and engaging in this balancing act is that we get better at it. Why do we get better at it? Because we become more attentive to how we are doing. Whereas in the past, it would take me, sometimes, months to realize, I've been on the wrong path. I've been, too much focused on delayed gratification. And, if you delay gratification indefinitely, you're never going to be gratified. So, and then I went to the other extreme, the hedonists end. And it took me a long time to realize I overdid it. Today, it's, I wouldn't say in a split second, but much faster than months or even days. I realize, I don't have enough fun in my day to day. All right, so I'm going to take a day off, or in the afternoon, go and on a roller coaster. By the way, sometimes literally, because this is one of my happy places. Roller coasters. So, or I'm just gonna, just watch a movie or spend the whole day reading, a favorite novel. And then there are times where I say to myself, I just feel like I need to dig deep now. I'm going to, 14-hour day today. And I have those once in a while, less often than I did when I was younger, but I do have those sometimes. So it's learning to be attentive to the printout. What's the printout? Emotions. So our emotions usually, not always, but usually give us a hint, and sometimes it's much more than a hint. Sometimes they're very loud in terms of, am I on the right path? Should I veer towards more delaying gratification, lock in, or should I just have, fun? Where is that balance for me now?
What I decipher from that, Tal, is that on your original thought of today's conversation, firstly, the permission to be human, and then in granting yourself that permission, you can then eventually develop the trust that you can trust yourself as a human being to find that balance, sometimes fall out of it, but negotiate your way back.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing, right? We have to give ourselves some trust and have some belief that we're fully capable of this. We are capable of being the captain of the ship.
Brady, that's such an important point. The way I see it, the difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope. Depression is sadness without hope. Because sadness, we all experience it, once a day or 10 times a day. It's just an emotion, it's temporary. It goes, it comes and goes. It becomes depression when we lose hope, when we think, okay, this is permanent. This is here to stay. This is not, this will not just pass. Now, when you have trust, or another word that you used is belief, that you can handle it and deal with it, what basically you are generating is hope. I trust that this will go away. I know that it will go away. Hope is back. Things are going to be better. That too shall pass. And then the actual experience can be perceived as an opportunity. How can I learn from it? What is it telling me? What can I do? How should I act based on what I feel? And then emotions and behavior and cognition work in unison. These are the ABCs of psychology. A stands for affect, emotion. B stands for behavior, action. C stands for cognition, thought. And it's when the ABC is working, or the ABCs are working together, that's when we fulfill our full human potential. That's when emotions, behaviors, and thoughts come together towards a common end, fulfillment, self-actualization, the realization of our potential.
Self-actualization, I love that. I've had a conversation recently with a former Special Forces soldier on the podcast, an Australian man by the name of Heston Russell, who was such a pleasure to chat to. And we spoke about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that top order being self-actualization, and how challenging it actually is to get to a place in your life in which you experience that.
Yeah.
And he essentially spoke about all of the order of emotions that sit below that on the scale, and the order of needs. And I guess it's the same in life, that until we address things from the bottom up, we won't experience that self-actualization of being in the state of happiness, as you so beautifully described throughout the course of this chat.
Again, Bradley, no shortcuts.
Which people hate to hear, but it's a lesson very well worth hearing and receiving. Tal, time escapes us a little bit today, so before you go, I just wanted to talk about an exciting opportunity for so many of the Aussies who listen to this podcast. There are a lot of fellow Aussies that are a part of this audience, and I know that some of them are in Brisbane, some aren't, but certainly whilst it takes a long time to fly from one side of the world to the other, in Australia, Brisbane is usually only an hour or so from anywhere that you exist within the major capitals of the country. And you're going to be there for the, correct me if I'm wrong with how I display this or name this, but the Positive Psychology Conference.
Yes, so it's known as IPA, which is the International Positive Psychology Association. And some of the leading scholars and practitioners from around Australia and around the world are going to be there the first week of July. And I can't tell you how excited I am to attend, to participate, and to learn. This is a conference that takes place once every 2 years. So it's a great opportunity, and I hope to see as many Aussies as possible.
Will it be your first time in the country?
No, I've been to Australia many times by myself, with my family, on vacation. It's one of our favorite places in the world.
I'm glad to hear it. Well, this time I'm actually speaking the week that you're here, so I won't be available. But the next time that you're in Australia, you have to let me know. The next time I'm over there, I'd love to catch up face to face and absorb some more of that happiness wisdom for my own life.
I very much look forward to it.
Thank you, Tal.
Thank you, Bradley.